In the wild, mysterious depths of Brittany, France, sits an old abandoned shack. Surrounded by ancient oaks and home to all manner of forest dwellers, it is here that we meet to share our stories. So pull up a seat, swing that light, grab your favourite beverage as we share another tantalising tale in the freaking shack.
Welcome back to the shack. Out here beneath the old oaks, the nights can feel older than they should, the sort of darkness that seems to remember things. Tonight it's just me in the shack. Steph is taking some time to be with her partner after Indiana, their beautiful white Swiss shepherd, was sadly put to sleep on Monday this week. So we'll hold them all in our hearts during this week's episode. We'll be keeping the fire low and the lamps dim as I tell you a strange story. This is one of those cases that sits right on the border between the paranormal and something even stranger. Because sometimes people don't see ghosts at all. Sometimes they see the past. Now, before we begin properly, I'll ask you to pull up your seat and swing that light. With my military family background, that phrase originates from an old naval tradition. At the end of the day, sailors would gather below decks and the lanterns would gently sway. Somewhere here. As the stories were shared. Soldiers were also encouraged to pull up a sandbag to sit on, probably around small fires or in the trenches, and tell tales, true tales, and the occasional strange one that nobody could quite explain. It works perfectly for us here in the shack. So tonight, please pull up your seat and I'll swing that light as we open the case of a most peculiar Victorian investigation. It begins in the autumn of 1895. At the time, the Victorian world had developed a curious obsession with the supernatural. Séances were fashionable, mediums were celebrated, scientists and scholars debated the existence of spirit with the same seriousness as they discussed electricity or medicine. In fact, an entire organisation had formed to study such matters. The rather grandly named Society for Psychical Research. But not everyone involved in these investigations believed the dead were actually speaking. One particular journalist was determined to prove the whole thing nonsense. His name, you may recognise if you've listened to many of our previous episodes from the end of last summer onwards, our now resident ghost host, Mortimer Witherblight. Mortimer at this time worked for the London newspaper, the Pall Mall Gazette, and he had made something of a reputation for himself, exposing fraudulent mediums and theatrical ghost hunters. So when he received an invitation to attend a paranormal investigation at a remote country lodge, he accepted for one simple reason. He intended to debunk it. The host of the event was an eccentric figure known as Silas Vane. Silas described himself as an acoustic occultist, which should already tell you everything you need to know about the man. Silas did not believe ghosts appeared visually. No, according to him, ghosts existed as vibrations or echoes, frequencies trapped in the fabric of buildings. To prove his theory, he had wired the entire lodge with a bizarre arrangement of copper wires, listening tubes, and trumpet-shaped horns hidden behind the wallpaper. All of these led to one central chamber where he believed the voices of the dead could be heard if one only listened carefully enough. Mortimer arrived armed with his own equipment, hidden mirrors, fine threads for detecting trick mechanisms. and the unwavering belief that every ghost had a perfectly rational explanation. He was not alone in the house that night. Also present was Lady Gwendolen Thorne, a widow dressed in deep mourning, who claimed that she hoped to contact her departed husband. A third guest was a former soldier named Arthur Pendergast. Pendergast was an unusual man. He insisted that he could smell the presence of the dead. According to him, ghosts carried a scent: cold iron, wet earth, and something faintly sweet like rotting flowers. Silas Vane, meanwhile, had prepared a range of peculiar devices for the evening's investigation. There was a mirror, a galvanometer, a delicate instrument normally used to measure electrical currents, which Silas claimed could detect when a spirit was draining energy from the living. There was also a strange contraption that he called a eulometer, a row of glass tubes arranged in a wooden frame. Under normal conditions, they were silent, but if atmospheric pressure shifted suddenly, they would begin to whistle, or as Silas preferred to say, howl. At midnight, the investigations began. Flour was carefully dusted across the floorboards of a chamber known as the Blue Room, so that any unseen footsteps would leave their mark. Candles were lit, notes were taken, and the guests spread themselves throughout the lodge to keep watch. Mortimer Witherblight was assigned to the Blue Room, and what happened next survives only through his written account. Mortimer's notes.
October 17th, 1895. I had stationed myself within the chamber known locally as the Blue Room, armed with my notebook and lantern. Mr. Vane's elaborate network of listening devices hummed faintly within the walls, though I suspected the apparatus served no purpose beyond impressing the gullible. The house grew quiet, unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to hesitate outside the windows. At precisely 3 a.m, something occurred that I find most difficult to commit to paper. The clock in the corridor stopped. Not slowed, stopped entirely. And with its silence, the room itself seemed to change. The smell of coal smoke vanished. In its place came the scent of fresh hay, newly cut, green and sweet. Perplexed, I crossed to the window, and there I witnessed an impossibility. The forest beyond the lodge disappeared. In its place stood a bustling yard beneath bright daylight. Horses stamped their hooves. Carriages rolled across pale gravel. Men shouted to one another in accents I cannot easily describe. The lodge itself was no longer a lodge. It was an inn, alive with movement, busy, sunlit, and entirely out of its own time.
Mortimer stood there staring out at the scene that simply could not exist in the middle of a cold October night. Then something happened that changed the entire nature of the event. The door behind Mortimer opened. Mortimer's notes.
I turned to see a young woman entering the room carrying a basket of linen. She hummed softly as she crossed the room, walking straight through me. The sensation was not cold. Rather, the air became heavy, dense, oppressive, as though the room itself objected to my presence. The girl paused. Slowly, she turned her head and looked directly towards where I stood. Her eyes widened. With visible terror, she whimpered, made the sign of the cross, and fled the chamber.
Mortimer had gone to the lodge expecting to see ghosts, but instead, someone from the past had apparently seen him. Now here's where the story becomes truly fascinating, because the next morning Mortimer confronted Silas Vane and demanded an explanation. And Silas gave him one. You see, Silas had never intended to contact the dead. His theory, his real theory, was something else entirely. He believed that certain buildings could act as a form of natural recording device, and that powerful human emotions could imprint themselves onto the very stone and timber of a place. Fear, joy, violence, despair, all preserved like echoes trapped inside the structure. If enough energy was applied, those echoes might play back. Today, paranormal researchers sometimes refer to this idea as the stone tape theory. Silas believed the lodge itself contained centuries of human activity, an old coaching inn long before it became a country retreat. And by filling the house with observers, emotions, and expectation, he believed he had provided the energy needed to replay a fragment of the past. Mortimer left the lodge with more questions than answers, but his final note in the journal remains the most chilling part of the entire account. Mortimer's final entry.
If it is true that I observed the past this evening, then one must consider another possibility. That for a brief moment, the past observed me, and to those who lived within that earlier time, I was the ghost.
And that, dear Shack Packers, is where the trail of this story fades. No further investigations of the lodge was ever formally recorded. Silas Vane disappeared from public life. Mortimer Witherblight returned to his journalism, though friends noted that he never again mocked stories of the supernatural quite so confidently, and he certainly doesn't now. Which leaves us in a rather uncomfortable thought. If buildings really can remember, if moments in time can occasionally bleed into one another, then perhaps the ghosts people see are not always spirits of the dead. Perhaps sometimes they are simply us, standing in the wrong century or in a different moment of time. Anyway, that's tonight's tale from the shack. The fire's burning low now, and the woods outside are very quiet indeed. So wherever you are listening from, or whatever time, keep your minds open and your lamps lit. And if you ever find yourself in an old building that suddenly smells like fresh hay, you might want to look out of the window, just in case the past is looking back. Good night, Shack Packers.
Thanks for hanging out in the shack with us. If you've got a strange story, theory, or even just a spooky question, send it to shackpackinbox@gmail.com because we'd love to hear from you. Follow us to ensure that you never miss an episode of The Freaking Shack, because listening to us is much cheaper than therapy and slightly more spooky. Until we meet again next week, Shack Packers, take care.